with Steph Curry coming off of an amazing finals performance where he averaged 31 a game, beating the Celtics in 6, it comes into question whether or not he is the greatest point guard of all time. Alongside that, the whole hierarchy of all-time point guards should be re-looked at. So let's evaluate the top 5 point guards of all time. Starting off with the hot take here, I have CP3 above players like Westbrook and John Stockton all time. First of all, I don't have John Stockton in even the honorable mentions because John Stockton is a player who most of his success is attributed to the system he played with as well as the players he played alongside with. Just given the talent of other all-time point guards, I just don't believe that John Stockton has what it takes to even make it to the top 6 or even top 5 all time. With that out of the way, let me explain why I have Chris Paul above Russell Westbrook all time. Starting off, let's compare the two as players. As players, Westbrook achieved a higher peak individually. We're talking about a guy who damn near had a triple-double every other game, while also getting 25 or more points. When comparing the two as players, CP3 easily wipes the floor. He's a better playmaker, more efficient, better isolation scorer, better defender, better IQ, better shooter. I could go on. So think about it like this. Russell Westbrook has reached incredible peaks, but only stayed there for 4 or 5 seasons. While Chris Paul, right from the get-go, came into the league and was a 20-10 guy, and now 17 seasons later, he is still that same guy. So as a player, I acknowledge the fact that Westbrook has had better seasons than Chris Paul, but Chris Paul overall has just proven himself to be the better player just off of longevity. When it comes to all-time accolades, sure, Russell Westbrook has that MVP up his sleeve, but let's also acknowledge the top 5 finalists for that MVP race were Isaiah Thomas, a 32-year-old LeBron James, and an emerging star in Kawhi Leonard, and James Harden before he entered his peak. Now looking at CP3, in his prime years, he was in competition for that MVP with players like Kobe, a prime LeBron, Kevin Garnett, Dwayne Wade, Kevin Durant. I could go on. If you put Russell Westbrook from that 2016 to 17 stint, he does not win an MVP in that era. So when looking at all-time accolades, it's in Westbrook's favor, but it needs to be contextualized. Now another point I add to all-time accolades that most may not is how they perform in the playoffs. When looking at how each performed in the playoffs, Westbrook doesn't necessarily choke, but his lack of an ability to shoot the ball at an efficient rate severely hurts him in the playoffs. He's had his moments. He's by no means accomplished nothing, but when comparing his playoff success to someone like Chris Paul, who's done his fair of choking as well, but plays at a better, more efficient level, takes teams out of the lottery, puts them in the playoffs, and elevates the teams he's been on, to me, Chris Paul ranks above Westbrook in that regard. Furthermore, Chris Paul has done more with less. Both Paul and Westbrook elevate their teams, and their co-stars tend to have their best seasons when they're on the roster. But Chris Paul has went around the league and rebuilt teams like HGTV's Fixer Upper. I mean, Chris Paul literally took the young core that Russell Westbrook had and took them to the playoffs, even though they had a less than 1% chance to win. Now, I'm not trying to say Chris Paul is just some all-time great playoff performer. Both players have choked a lot in the playoffs. So in my eyes, it's a battle of who's choked the least, and that goes to Chris Paul. So with that being established, that he's the better overall player, has the greater impact on the teams he's been on, and has choked less, I have Chris Paul at number 5 for all-time point guards. Next up, I have Oscar Robertson at number 4. Oscar Robertson is a clear number 4 to me all time because when comparing him to players like Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, and John Stockton, and so forth, he easily clears all of them just with all-time accolades alone. And then when considering his impact on the court with his scoring ability and triple doubles, he easily surmounts what Chris Paul, John Stockton, Russell Westbrook, any of them can do. He's a 2-time NBA champion, 12-time All-Star, 11-time All-NBA, and has 1 MVP, and holds the record for second most triple-doubles. I don't think there's too much debate here because in the pool of all-time point guards, you can count on your hand how many actually have tangible and meaningful champions or MVPs. The Big O is just one of these 4 players, and that's why I have him at number 4. Next up is Isaiah Thomas at number 3. Although not on the level of Steph Curry and Magic, Isaiah Thomas is an easy number 3 to me. Isaiah Thomas is a 2-time champ with a Finals MVP and 12-time NBA All-Star. Isaiah Thomas is someone who was the best player on a title contending team several times, someone who was the best player on a team that won a championship, and when looking back at his game and what he brings to the table as a player, his entire career, he's been a guy that puts up 20 on the board as well as dishing out 9 assists. The one other person that comes close to Isaiah Thomas other than Magic or Curry is Oscar Robertson. I have Isaiah over the Big O because Isaiah Thomas is a centerpiece for a dynasty in one of the most competitive era of NBA history. He was matching up against the likes of Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Moses Malone, Michael Jordan. I could go on. Now consider the fact that he was matching up against these players and winning at a high level. Now don't get me wrong, Oscar Robertson was no Robin. The Bucks dynasty in the 70s consisted of 2 full-on Batmans. However, outside of the Kareem era, before when Oscar Robertson was a Cincinnati Royal, the most they won in a season was 55 games. In terms of winning, Isaiah was able to win more in a more competitive era than the Big O. So regardless of his high level of scoring and triple doubles, it just wasn't able to translate into winning, and that's why I have Isaiah over him all time. Now let's look at Magic Johnson versus Stephen Curry. To start things off, let's look at what each player brings to the table individually. Starting with Magic Johnson, as mentioned earlier, he's one of the greatest passers to ever play the game. He averages a ridiculous 11 assists a game for his entire career. One of the biggest knocks to his game is that he lacks as a scorer, which isn't even the case. His career average is 19 points per game, but considering that his primary focus on the court is to be a playmaker, 20 points is far above the standards we hold players like Steve Nash and John Stockton at. I've never heard anyone knock Stockton or Nash for not being a scorer because their main jobs were playmaking. And it's the same thing with Magic Johnson. On the court, his main job is to be a playmaker and distributor, and he's also gaining 20 points alongside with that. So to me, to say that Magic Johnson can't score tells me you don't know what you're talking about. One legitimate knock to Magic Johnson's game is on the other side of the court, defense. He isn't necessarily a bad defender, but he's not good enough where I give a bonus to him in that regard. Then when looking at his intangibles, Magic Johnson's leadership qualities are what made him and the Lakers so successful. Many players were elevated in their careers while playing alongside with Magic Johnson because of how Magic Johnson approached the game and his leadership qualities. Now when looking at Curry, he's the greatest scoring point guard of all time. Then furthermore, he's the greatest shooter of all time. There's no argument that can dispute that fact. There's no one that even comes close. When it comes to Stephen Curry, he is the greatest shooter in all of humanity's existence. I would argue that the probability that some extraterrestrial species has someone who can shoot the ball better than Curry is so low that he might as well be the greatest shooter in the universe's infinite existence. In fact, I would further argue that even with technological advances we will have in 100 years from now, you still couldn't create a robot or machine that can shoot better than Curry. When we talk about Steph Curry, that's how great of a shooter he is. Alongside shooting, his inside scoring has significantly improved since the start of his career, where he's evolved from just a 3-point shooter at the beginning of his career to now an all-around scorer who happens to be the greatest shooter ever. He took his scoring average of 17 points per game through the first 3 years of his career to a player who's putting up 25 points every game. His peak scoring was from 2015 to 2022, and throughout that period he averaged 27 points per game, led the league in scoring in 2015, and when it comes to passing, he is no means even close to Magic Johnson, but he's definitely above average. With a career average of 6.5 assists a game, Curry as a passer is great, but like I said, he's not someone like Magic Johnson who can just generate offense out of thin air. Now when looking at accolades, Magic Johnson's career is a tale of winning. I mean, the show about him is called Winning Time. As a player, he put winning ahead of everything else. Magic Johnson is a 5-time NBA champ, 3 times NBA Finals MVP, 3-time MVP, 4-time regular season assist leader. Then when looking at Curry, he's a 4-time NBA champ. Only once did he win the Finals MVP, which was in 2022. But let's be honest, he deserved it over Andre Iguodala. In the regular season, he's a 2-time MVP, with him being the first and only ever unanimous MVP in 2016. For Curry, one of the biggest arguments dispelling some of his major accomplishments is that he only won so much because he played on the Justice League of basketball. 2017 through 2019, with the addition of Kevin Durant and Boogie Cousins, beating the Warriors was impossible unless everyone on that team got injured, which is exactly what happened in 2019 against the Kawhi-led Raptors. However, that argument fails to acknowledge that without Kevin Durant, they were a 73-9 team and won 2 NBA championships. Without Kevin Durant, do they win the rings in 2017 and 2018? Potentially no, but the matter of fact is that they did win those rings, whether or not those rings were basically handed to them and the Warriors when KD joined. However, even with the abundant help that Curry has had, let's not forget that Magic had Kareem, James Worthy, and Michael Cooper. I'm certain we all know who Kareem and James Worthy are, but for those who don't know, Michael Cooper, he was easily the best defensive unit the Magic-led Lakers had. He was selected for 8 defensive first teams and won a DPOY in '87. I will testify that Steph's help was significantly better than Magic's help was. He had a shorter prime than Curry, did more than Curry, all with less help than Curry had. However, Curry's longevity is why I believe, when looking at what each player brings to the table, their all-time accolades, is why I believe Curry is the better player all time. Think about it like this. Imagine a candle that burns incredibly bright for a certain amount of time. Now imagine that same candle that burns 95% as bright, but burns for a significantly longer amount of time. That's what it's like comparing Magic Johnson to Curry. Magic burned incredibly bright for a very short amount of time, but Curry burned only 95% as bright, but for a longer amount of time. So it's all about what you value. The peaks that a player accomplished, or how long did that player stay at that peak. In my eyes, I acknowledged the incredible peaks that Magic Johnson reached, but I value how much longer Curry's been able to stay at his peak over the peaks that Magic Johnson accomplished. However, if you're not convinced yet, I'll convince you with this last point. When it comes to impacting the game of basketball, as players, both Steph and Magic have resounding impact on the way the game's played. Steph's impeccable shooting ability normalized shots beyond the arc further than it had already been. Leading up to 2015, the league average was slightly above 23-point attempts per game. But with Steph's legendary run in 2015, where he attempted 11 threes a game and made roughly 45% of them, traditional offensive sets were thrown out the window, and it was clear that 3-pointers were the next big thing. Of course, the 3-point shot had been there well before Steph's time, but coming off of screens and pulling up for a deep 3-pointer, going for threes in transition rather than the lay, and pulling up from the logo with 14 left on the clock were all brought to the game by Steph Curry, for better or for worse. Of course, not all ought to be attributed to Steph. Steve Kerr and the coaching staff of the Golden State Warriors have made this style of play widespread across the league and even into European leagues. But let's not be mistaken, it's Curry's talent and offensive skill set that's changed the game overall, with a new wave of popularity for the three. When comparing it to the impact that Magic Johnson had, Magic didn't change the way the game was played in the way Curry did. Rather, Magic Johnson is a player who maximized his production in an already established point guard role. So unlike Curry, it was Magic Johnson's skill set for his height that was revolutionary, not his approach to the game. When looking at what each player brings to the table, their all-time accolades, their impact on the game, in my eyes, there's a clear-cut answer with Steph Curry as the greatest point guard of all time. He clears Magic as a player with his ability to score and him still being regarded as an elite playmaker. Magic does have the upper hand with all-time accolades, but with Curry winning his 4th ring as well as breaking the record for all-time 3-pointers made, in terms of all-time accolades, he's really not that far behind from Magic Johnson. Now then, when considering his impact, It's clear that Steph has made the larger impact on the game than Magic. He's changed the way we play basketball forever, whether it's for the better or for the worse. So because he's the better player, is not even that far behind in all-time accolades, and you can even make the argument that he's above Magic with all-time accolades, and has a larger impact on the game on a worldwide all-time level. I have Steph Curry as the greatest point guard of all time and Magic Johnson as number 2. Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. Until next time.